Okay, so as we wrap up the Holy Week, I figured it'd be a good time to sort of talk about the places that I've seen in the Middle East where that are still accessible for in certain countries that have to do with the significance in the Bible and the Old Testament and the New Testament. So we're gonna start with this first photo here. It is a place called Dadan. It is in an area of Saudi Arabia and one of their big tourist locations called AlUla. AlUla is one of the first UNESCO sites in Saudi Arabia. It opened as Saudi opened up to tourism in 2019. You are now able to access this place, and I really recommend it because what it does is it allows you to see not just Dadan, but you're able to see AlUla itself, Hegra, and there's a lot of historical elements that go there. Everything from some what they call the library. You have Nebatean tombs that I've talked about before, but I highlight this because it was. I don't think people think of parts of the Bible actually being in Saudi Arabia because we all associate it with Jordan and Syria and Egypt. So it's so I figured I would start here. And what this was, these were tombs for the Dadanites, and so you have these squares that are carved out here, and that's where they would lay their dead. Now, when these were discovered, there were attempts to move the bodies, but because the Dadanites were not familiar with embalming, when they went to move the bodies, they basically turned to dust. And while there are paths up here and there are stairs to be able to see it, they're effectively off limits because the bodies cannot be moved and they want them to not be disturbed. Whereas when the Nabateans later came to this area, the Nabateans knew about embalming and therefore their bodies were able to be safely transferred from Saudi Arabia to Jordan, as that was the home of the Nabateans. Um, the next piece, I'm going to sort of try to go in chronological order here. Um, when we think of the Bible, um, outside of the Garden of Eden and then Noah and the Ark, the big thing we see is the parting of the Red Sea. And, you know, I think a lot of people wonder, how were they able to do the Red Sea? And I think when you look at it and we start to see some of the archaeological evidence that exists, it was much more feasible that the Gulf of Aqaba, which is a northern part of the Red Sea, was probably more likely to be the place that was crossed by Moses and the Israelites. As you can see in this photo here that I took from Saudi Arabia, you're able to see the on the horizon. You're able to see the Sinai Peninsula, and this is about 10 miles across. Beautiful blue water, and you could tell from this photo that it was pretty windy and rough that day. But we know that as the Israelites were backed up against the water and the Egyptians were running down on them, that God commanded Moses to use his staff and to spread his arms, and that God would part the waters, and that's what he did. And Moses led the Israelites across the Gulf of Aqaba to the other side, which is Saudi Arabia. And it says that as they walked across dry land, Moses stretched his hand out over the water, and God brought the waters back together, and it crushed the Egyptians in the middle of the sea. This and as I talked about earlier, you have the archaeological evidence, and this evidence, what it does, you go down and look, and you're able to find under the surface of the water a coral that is in the shape of chariots. It is in the shape of the wheels on the axles of the chariots. Now, if these things had not been covered in coral, then they obviously would have deteriorated over time and we would not have them as evidence. But one has to ask the question, why were there chariots and the Egyptian wheels for the chariots with their spokes? Why are they in the middle of the Gulf of Aqaba? And it's in the middle of the Gulf of Aqaba. It's not like it is, a few hundred feet out. There have been people that have dove in this area and they have been able to see this coral and brought back evidence of it. So, as I said, uh, the evidence is stronger here that this is where God commanded Moses and the Israelites to cross and escape from Egypt. So when we go into Exodus 15, it talks about the waters of Merah and Elam. And in this area, it talks of the 12 springs and the 70 palms. And it talks about sweet waters and bitter waters. And the bitter water is sort of a salty water, whereas the sweet waters were waters that were drinkable. And in this area, it is not the most pristine. It's not a very beautiful place, but there are the palm trees. And in these waters, you're able to see where the water percolates up out of the sand. And it would constantly refresh itself for people to have something to drink and to feed their animals. There's another place about 2 miles inland, which also sort of fits the 12 springs and 70 palms, um, but it is further from the coast. And it is possible that that is also where Moses and the Israelites escaped to after they had reached the Arabian part of the world to escape from the Egyptians. Next thing that is a pretty significant piece of Moses' journey is the split rock of Horeb. And God tells Moses, I will stand there before you at the rock of Horeb. Tells Moses to strike the rock and water will come out of it for the people to drink. And Moses did this. However, it's important to remember that, and we'll see later in the story of Moses, that Moses was told to strike it once. But we know that he struck it once and nothing happened, and then he struck it a second time. And we'll go into later into why this is significant. But when you're looking at this rock, you're able to see where there is something that looks like water erosion. We know that wind over the last several thousand years have sort of smoothed out this rock, but it is an odd formation for anything else. I mean, this has to have been the work of God because there's no other reason that this rock would have split in this way. And then to have something of water erosion down at the bottom of the rock as it filled the valley with water for the Israelites and their animals. I think the next big part that we think of in the Bible, especially when we think of Moses, is his journey to Mount Sinai. Now, when we're looking at this mountain here, you can see where it is black towards the top, and then there is a determinate line where it turns more of the brown as you head back into the sandstone. There have been people to venture to the top of this mountain who have picked up some of the small rocks, and as you look at one side, they are blackened as if they are burnt, and they have been subjected to significant heat and pressure. But on the other side, they are red and brown, the same as what we see in the bottom of the mountain today. And it goes in to say that on the third day there was thunder and lightning, with a thick cloud over the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the area had to have been scared because they had just escaped from Egypt, and to hear this noise had to have been terrifying to them. But Moses led the people of the camp to the foot of the mountain, and they saw that it was covered in smoke as the Lord descended upon it in fire. The smoke billowed up like smoke from a furnace, and everything trembled. And so as the people waited at the base of this mountain, Moses went back because no one was to see God or see the Lord except for Moses. Not even the elders or Aaron or Joshua were allowed to go to the top of the mountain except for Moses. And one of the some of the things, so I have the background here is uh, you have the uh, some of the pillars, and you have the altar of Moses because uh, God had commanded Moses to erect 12 pillars representing the 12 tribes of Egypt or Israel. And that's what you can see here, these white stones. These are believed to be the 12 pillars, or the remnants of them, that had been erected for the 12 tribes. And it says that they offered burnt offerings, which there have been studies done on this altar that if basically, if they wanted to funnel um, animals, livestock, to in a direction to be slaughtered, this is how they would do it. They would basically run the animals down towards us as you're facing the screen, and then they would turn to their right and they would head back up in the other direction. And they know that there are bone remnants of animals in that area. And it says that um, Moses sprinkled blood upon the altar, and then he sprinkled the blood upon the people, and said, "This is the covenant." And the people said that, we will do everything that the Lord has said, and that they will obey. But we're soon going to find out that that is not what um, God's promised people were to do. So quickly they forgot what He had done for them. So as we know that Moses had gone back up to the top of the mountain, and he had been up there for a while, the the Israelites became disheartened, and uh, uh, they commanded Aaron to make them gods to worship because they had lost faith that God was going to continue to care for them. And so, along with that, um, Aaron commanded the people to give up their gold, and they erected an altar, and Aaron made them a golden calf to worship. So in this place, it is odd because cows are not indigenous to Saudi Arabia, and so to see carvings of cows on these rocks, similar to how they would be shaped and carved as if they were from Egypt, is unique. And this is all disheveled now, but it is in the burnt places that you have these cows for to represent that this was the altar. And this area has now been marked off by um, the Ministry of Archaeology and History in Saudi Arabia because they do not want this to be tampered with or destroyed. Because they also see this as a place of significance. And you're able to go here and you're able to see it. But it was when basically God told Moses to go back down to the bottom of the mountain because the people had started to act out and disobey and break with the covenant that God had commanded Moses to give to the people. And so we see that as punishment, um, Moses told the Israelites to take up swords and to strike down brothers, friends, and neighbors for those who had broken the covenant and had worshiped this idol of a golden calf. And as such, 3,000 idolaters were killed. And what's odd is if you go 2 miles, 2 or 3 miles away from the golden calf altar, which we had just looked at, you find this area here and you have rocks that are in an upright position, and these rocks have no earthly reason to be upright unless it is to signify that this is someplace something took place here. And there have been surveys of this area done, and they've done subterranean surveys, and they know that there are remains buried under the ground here. And you'll see where you have graves that are marked off in squares. Others have what would basically be like a headstone to us. You have a rectangular stone in an upright position. So there's a lot of evidence to point here that this is the grave of the 3,000 idolaters that had been struck down at the hand of the Levites for uh, basically breaking the covenant and worshiping a false idol. And at, when we look at this, this is also another area that the Saudi government has fenced off. And one of the reasons that is for that, other than protection, they obviously do not want this to be a place of pilgrimage for Jewish or Christian people to come into this area, because we know that Saudi Arabia currently is a country that recognizes no other religion but Islam. So they do not want people of other faiths, whether they're Abrahamic religions or not, coming into Saudi Arabia for a pilgrimage to these areas. So, um, as the people were wandering the desert, one of the punishments were people being bitten by snakes. And they were dying because the snakes were venomous. So the Lord told Moses to take the staff that he had used at to part the seas, that he had used to strike the rock in Horeb, and to make a bronze snake and wrap that bronze snake around the staff and put it up. And if someone was bitten by the snake, if they looked up on this staff, then they would be healed. And what's honestly kind of funny about this is that the when you look at an emblem of a pharmacist today, it is a snake wrapped around a pole. And that comes from the bronze serpent that Moses had created, because the pharmacists are giving you something to heal you. And that's where that symbolism comes from. And you have this metal sculpture, I can't say that it's necessarily bronze, on top of Mount Nebo, is there to signify that this is a place where Moses had been and where God had told him to do this to heal the Israelites from the snake bites. And earlier, you remember me talking about where God had commanded Moses to strike the rock at Horeb one time, but we know that Moses struck it twice. And when we get to Deuteronomy, this is where Moses saw the promised land. And it said he climbed Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab to the top of Pisgah across from Jericho. The Lord showed him the whole land from Gilead to Dan, all of Naphtali, the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh, and all the land of Judah as far as the Mediterranean Sea, so on and so forth. And then the Lord said to him, "This is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when I said, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over into it." And like I said, this is, you know, God used Moses to take his people out of Egypt, to take them to the promised land. But as God's servant, Moses was expected to have the ultimate faith in God that he would always provide. And when he struck the rock twice, he demonstrated a lack of faith in God to the rest of the Israelites and the elders of the Jews. And as such, his punishment was to never enter the promised land. And as it says here, Moses climbed to Mount Nebo, and when he got to Mount Nebo and saw the promised land, and Moses, the servant, the Lord died there in Moab, as the Lord had said. And the Byzantines built a church on top of Mount Nebo in Jordan to signify that this is where Moses, probably one of the most read about prophets that this is where he had died. And there is mosaics all throughout this church. You have the serpent sculpture that I showed earlier. You're able to see the promised land from this mountain. And this is where there is a memorial to Moses. It's talked about in Deuteronomy 34, where he died shortly after seeing the promised land. So as we move into the New Testament, I'm going to see if this works. And it appears that it's not going to. Oh, here, we do this. There we go. Okay. So we know that we've heard the story of the massacre of the innocents, where Herod was threatened by the birth of Jesus and that he was going to become the king of the Jews. And as we know, Herod commanded that all children, all boys under the age of 2 were to be killed. So an angel appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt, and stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." So Joseph got up, he took Jesus and his mother, Mary, during the night, and they left for Egypt, and where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet Hosea, "Out of Egypt I called my son." And so it's written in Matthew, so it's written in the Gospels, but it's also written in by the prophet Hosea, who was actually before Isaiah, that God was going to call his son out of Egypt. And that's what he did. God protected Jesus by sending him to Egypt to be free from the massacre from Herod until Herod died, and then he returned to the promised land, to Jerusalem, and there he was able to, until the age of 30, when Jesus became a rabbi, to live his life and learn the teachings of God. And so, like I said, it's a video that I took as you go under. So this photo that is right behind my head, this is the well where you still have water in it, and it is protected by the Coptic Church in Egypt. But that is water where the Holy Family pulled the water to drink. But in the video that you're seeing, that is actually the cave where the Holy Family hid from Herod for 3 months after reaching Egypt. And the next place is fairly significant because we know that John the Baptist prepared the way for Jesus. And we also know that Christ was baptized by his cousin John the Baptist. And we know that it took place in the River Jordan. So it says in Matthew 3, Jesus came from Galilee to the Jordan, the River Jordan, to be baptized by John. But John was basically saying, "I need to be baptized by you, and you're coming to me to be baptized." And Jesus told him, "Let it be so now, that it's proper for us to do this to fulfill all righteousness." And then John gave in. And as soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water. And at that moment, heaven was opened. And he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting him. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, whom I love, and with him I am well pleased." And to me, this is probably one of the most significant places that I visited, because you can almost say that this is where Jesus started his ministry. And he went about, and you being able to see where Christ is baptized, and there's a good reason to believe that this is where it took place, because they know that in the 5th century, so 400 years later, there were marble steps going into a baptismal where they still had pilgrims coming to be baptized where Christ had been baptized. Now, over time, the River Jordan has moved more to the west, so the river no longer flows into these baptismals, but it is through history and excavation archaeology, it is well believed that this is the place where Christ was baptized by his cousin John the Baptist. So, bring that back up. So, I bring all this up because, like I said, we are exiting the Holy Weekend. There's a lot of the New Testament and the Gospels that I'm not able to show my personal photos of because in my time in the Middle East, I was not able to go to Israel due to just basically it was cost prohibitive at the time. So if I'm living there and it's cost prohibitive, I know that it's going to be that way for a lot of people who are living in the U.S. or the Western Hemisphere right now. But it is not to say that there are not other places that are significant to the Bible outside of Israel that you can visit. Jordan is a fantastic place. There is so much to see with regard to the Bible. There is so much to see with regard to just human history in Jordan. And the same thing with Egypt. We know that that Moses was they were building the pyramids. We know that it was Ramesses II was the pharaoh when Moses and the Israelites fled Egypt. And there are still the tombs of Ramesses II. We know that he lived a very long life, and he had actually commandeered the stories of previous pharaohs and made them his own. So you're able to go see that in Egypt as well. Without focusing just on the pyramids or the Sphinx, there's so much more to Egypt to see. And then as well as Saudi Arabia being open for tourism. You don't necessarily need to say that you're going to do a Christian pilgrimage. You can go to see some of the other historical elements of Saudi Arabia. But in doing so, it puts you into a place where you are able to see these locations. Now, you might ask, why am I going over this? I was able to do this because I lived over there. I was able to make the right connections. It'll be a little bit harder for somebody who is not living there to be able to do this, and that's why you come to me. As your travel advisor, I am able to get you connected with the right people. I'm able to make sure that you have the proper accommodations, and I can guide you through the process to make sure that the overall trip is as smooth as possible. As with everything else, there's no fees charged by me. And I'm going to find you a deal that is better than what you're going to find looking yourself on any of the discount sites, any of the other wholesale box stores that have a travel agency, credit card travel agencies. I'm going to do better than all of them because at the end of the day, if something was to happen, especially with something significant like this, where it is not as simple as flying from a major outlet in the U.S. to London, where it should be smooth sailing. This is going to be a slightly more complicated trip. You need to make sure that you're able to call somebody who can help get issues resolved. That's why my clients have my personal number so that I can help address the headaches. But really what it comes down to is not just saving you money, but saving you time in the process because I've already done the research. I've done this myself. So you're not having to waste time to find where to book, how to book, and make the connections that you need to make to be able to have such an insightful journey. So at the end of the day, let me help put one of these trips together for you. If you are wanting to do a pilgrimage trip and you want to start or end with these locations in Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt before going to Israel, because I definitely recommend it going that way instead of trying to go from Israel into Saudi Arabia, then then reach out to me. Also, you need to know some of the curiosities of the culture and the importance of going in and out of these countries. So you need to make sure that you're talking to me and not just trying to Google and have somebody tell you something that's never actually gone through this experience, or they used a provider who was a tour operator handling all that stuff. Because if you're doing a river cruise in Egypt, they're handling your visas, and you're not doing this from an independent fashion. They are controlling every element of it for you. So it's another reason that you talk to me, because I can advise you on all of these things that you need to know before you get there to make the trip as smooth as possible for you. So I'm hoping that, as like I said, we head out of the Holy Weekend. We know that we have the Feast of Pentecost is coming. And so we need to also always be aware of that the evidence is there. It's We know that Christ was the Son of Man, Son of God, and we it it is my faith that has brought me to these places, that has and it has been strengthened over time, and I'm wanting to make sure that everybody else can see this, because all of the evidence is there to believe that there was a Christ, there was a Messiah, and that we need to understand and recognize this so that we know where our final destination is going to be. So I'm going to wrap up this session. I think what I'm looking at doing next week is a Facebook Live on business travel, as well as how I am able to help business to business bookings, and help with executive and group travel as well. So I'm always open to ideas. Anybody wants to hear any particular topic, be informed about destinations, let me know. I am able to get you into some fascinating places. You can have a fantastic time, and you don't have to worry about the stress or the headache of doing it on your own when you have an experienced expert in handling all the details for your trip, such as myself. So until next week, everyone have a good week. And like I said, next week we will be talking about business travel.